Hello, everybody, and welcome to Narrative. It's good to have you here with me, and it's a good time, I think, to discuss last week's presidential debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. The main question I have is, was the debate rigged against Joe Biden? Was there some sort of sabotage to make him act the way he did, so out of the ordinary, so confused? We need to find the answer to that question, and we're going to try answer it tonight. Now, truthfully, there has never been a political catastrophe in the midst of an election campaign like the one we saw in Atlanta last week. I think we can all agree on it. It was infuriating and difficult to watch. But tonight, 10 days later, the Democrats are still obsessively hand-wringing and jockeying for power. We just have to ask the question, why? After all, maybe something happened to your candidate. Maybe something happened to Joe Biden on the night of the debate. And why aren't you taking a look at what that was before bringing out the long knives and trying to cull his entire presidency? And they should also be asking, what was it that made Donald Trump's performance so weird, so unhinged, so rehearsed, but not in a good way? And why was it allowed to go unchecked by the media? His barrage of lies and so many other things completely ignored. Those of us who can think that far back still remember that Donald Trump tried to give Joe Biden COVID during the 2020 election debates. The media has an absolute obsession with the replace Biden narrative. What is it about MSNBC and all the others who seem to pile on every time there's a possibility that they can bury the president of the United States when they are supposed to be the standard bearers for Democratic Party reporting? Let me be honest with you. If you're pushing a replace Biden narrative at this stage, you're basically just functioning as a functionary of the Russian intelligence services that have been pushing the same narrative for over a year and a half now, and you've reported on it. So why on earth are you acting on it? Everyone needs to take a deep breath and a group rethink. Let's think about this before we just follow the noise wherever that may lead us. Do we really think it's a good idea to ditch Joe Biden, who successfully has taken on Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, and who's had an incredibly successful first term and wants a second term? Is it a good idea to replace him at the top of the ticket? Really, is it a good idea? The answer is no. I've had 8 years to get to know what a Russian disinformation opera looks like, and I can tell you with a great certainty that what happened last Thursday follows a pretty textbook playbook of a Russian disinformation op. We've been building up to this date for a year and a half, maybe longer, ever since you first heard there might be something wrong with Biden's health. That came from Russian disinformation. It's been growing and growing ever since, and last week on Thursday, it went from being something discussed in the internet sphere into something discussed in a very significant way amongst all the media players and the Democratic Party after one very unfortunate event, which we still do not know the truth of. For his part, Biden told George Stephanopoulos yesterday that he was having a bad night, and he doesn't know why. We should take his word for it. And we, as the media, we should be trying to answer the why. Personally, I think the staging, audio, and video production clearly tilted the debate towards Trump's favor. But I believe there is something else going on. A mission to confuse, disorient, and seriously damage the campaign the Russians fear the most. And that is the campaign of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. There's not a single person in the Democratic Party that they fear more than Joe Biden and Kamala Harris because of their performance in the last 3.5 years. Tonight, I'm going to run you through some of the things that I think they did in order to disorient and confuse Joe Biden last week on Thursday night. Now, if you're asking where I'm coming from, I've had a lot of experience in live TV news production over the years. I've exec produced thousands of hours of live network broadcasts, so I'm coming at this from a perspective of an EP, an executive producer. Now, EPs are not typically audio engineers. They're not camera operators. We don't do the lights. We're not technical people. But we must know, in order to do our jobs, we must know the broad roles of each of those people who do the technical functions, and need to have a pretty good grasp around those, or we'll get eaten alive by the crew. So we're going to go through that tonight with my EP experience and tell you why I think there were some things that were really shifty about last week's debate that we really need to answer. Finally, I'm not here to speak on behalf of the CNN producers. I didn't produce the debate. I don't work for CNN, never have worked for CNN. And I have great respect for the people who work there. I'm also not accusing anyone of foul play. But because CNN is such an important brand and this event is so highly unusual, it's in everyone's interest to get to the bottom of this. Coming up, we'll have much more of George Stephanopoulos' interview with Joe Biden, plus the findings of my own audio tests. and my observations as a producer about why things unfolded the way they did, and a lot of questions about why the president suddenly fell ill. All that is coming up on Narrative tonight. So this is where we go live. This is the fun part. If you haven't been to one of these Narrative live tapings before, welcome. It's good to have you here. We do part of the show on tape there and it looks slicker and more produced, but really, I want to get you guys involved in the conversation here as I present some new evidence to you about what it was that may have tripped up President Joe Biden last Thursday. I will say that the chief amongst my concerns is the fact that I remember that very clearly the 2020 event when Donald Trump basically tried to give Joe Biden COVID. And this was about as plain and obvious as a thing as you can imagine. It happened right before our eyes. We found out that he had COVID later, but Joe Biden was at the debate stage when Donald Trump and his crew of family arrived at the debate, unmasked for the most part of the debate. They arrived wearing masks, but they took off all their masks once inside. They basically hovered around the president of the United States, or now the president of the United States, but then he was, of course, just the former vice president. And they were fully engaged in, I think, passing or trying to get the candidate for the Democratic Party involved in getting COVID. The most important thing on Vladimir Putin's mind right now is to stop Joe Biden from being the president again. Just think about the nightmare that Joe Biden has put Vladimir Putin under since Donald Trump has gone out of power. Think of the war in Ukraine and the support of NATO that Donald Trump could only have dreamed of building, and that Joe Biden has miraculously assembled this coalition of partners and has been able to provide enough weapons to Vladimir Zelensky and the Ukrainian people to ward off the Russian army. It's now cost them 500,000 souls. 500,000 people have died in the Russian army fighting this incredibly organized effort by Vladimir Zelensky and Joe Biden to fight back the Russians. Of course, the number one priority for Vladimir Putin is to get rid of Joe Biden as the president. And here we have a Democratic Party that is reveling in this idea that they're going to be the ones who are stabbing the knife in the back of the president that has given them the most, probably the most successful president in the last century. It boggles the mind when you think about that it's the Democrats that are out there arguing that Joe Biden shouldn't be the president of the United States, when in fact, he is the thing that stands between dictatorship and freedom, those two choices that we face right now. We're all sitting here wondering whether in January of next year we will have a democracy to still play in, whether on day one, when if Donald Trump becomes president, he probably will. He's threatened to do that. He says he will. And yet here we are trying to even think about replacing the one person who can stop him. It's ludicrous, everybody. It's ludicrous. You got to stop this. If you're in the Democratic Party, there's no one better. There's no one better to put in place of Joe Biden. We've been through this now so many times. Why are we trying again? And if you think that a younger person has more capability than someone who has been in public service for 40 years and personally knows all the world leaders, the way that Joe Biden knows the world's leaders, maybe you've got a point, but I can tell you there is no one more qualified than Joe Biden, and he's proven it again and again. And he said as much today, or yesterday at least, to George Stephanopoulos of ABC News. And we'll play a little bit of that interview coming up, just to give us a refresher of the fact that he's very communicative, very able to respond to direct questions, and he's able to discern what is being asked of him. You have to get a sense from this guy that he knows what he's doing. He's going to win. He wants to win. And there's certainly no one better that I can think of in the Democratic Party that's going to do as good a job as him. And if the only answer that you've got is Kamala Harris, she's on the ticket anyhow. She's there already. She's baked in. You've already got her. So you don't have to worry about the potential that you're not going to get this great talent, Kamala Harris, involved in your White House. She's already there. What we need to stop is Russian disinformation, and we need to stop this nonsense of people believing Russian disinformation at every little juncture. And to that extent, I'm going to remind you that 2 days before Trump and Melania tested positive for COVID-19, Trump family broke venue rules and went maskless at the presidential debate. They had so little regard for the elections in 2020 that they decided they were going to try and infect Joe Biden with COVID. That's the guys we're dealing with here. These are the people that you're trying to support now by getting rid of Joe Biden. So Why did they do that? They wanted to weaken his campaign. Flash forward to 4 years later, and here we are in the 24 cycle, same two candidates up there, and something goes awfully awry at a presidential debate. And anyone watching could have seen that the president was not in his best form. There's something clearly wrong with the president of the United States. And anyone with a memory that goes back 4 years would have recalled, hey, do you remember they did that thing where they tried to give the president COVID 4 years ago? Maybe they're up to some funny business now. These guys are not exactly paragons of truth and virtue. We're talking about a crew from a mob family here. These guys are out to get America and its wealth, and they're out to get your freedoms, and they mean no good to you at all. Their goal is merely to destroy America and take its wealth. So if they did this in 2020, what could they do in 2024? There's no one who could watch that event, who could come away with the thought that there was not a challenge in terms of the lighting, in terms of the audio, in terms of the setup, in terms of the format. None of it really worked for Joe Biden. It was all just designed to disorient Joe Biden, in my opinion. And I'll tell you why I believe that. The format was so rushed. If you're an old guy of 81, you probably don't love the fast-paced, rapid-fire questions that were handed out there. And yet, that's very unusual for a debate. You don't normally get rapid-fire questions like that. It's like, why the rapid-fire questions? Why can't you slow down, say the questions quite normally, speak at a normal pace, maybe give everyone a chance to comprehend what was just said? Why are we moving forward so quickly? Why is everything such a rush if it's not just to disorient one of the candidates sitting on your stage or standing on your stage? Just at the very outset, this format of this 2-minute thing plus a 1-minute response, and then the rapid fire of the moderators, this consistent and nonstop barrage of questions and this timing that seemed to be so specific. Obviously, if someone's in the middle of a sentence, they can go 10 seconds longer. You don't have to stop them right in the middle of the sentence. But for Dana Bash, it was okay to just 2 minutes over Mr. Biden, mostly Mr. Biden, not Mr. Trump. And those are the kinds of things that made me realize that we're dealing with a non-traditional sort of venue here for the debate. And of course we are. It's a non-traditional thing that we had there. 2 presidents on stage, not normal. But it also wasn't under the auspices of the normal debate committee that does US presidential events. There's a crew that do this all along. They know what they're doing. They've been around for many years, and this has been their shtick, right? They know how to throw debates, and they know the rules. They know the things to look for. And I don't believe that they were involved in this at all. So suddenly we've got, for the first time in a long time, a US presidential debate that's under the auspices of CNN, we think. But there's a new management at CNN, all the way up and down, including new owners. So we can't really judge CNN on its past achievements. We got to look at who they've got there now. And we're handing over the most important presidential debate ever to them. And we are also, even the past management of CNN had a history with Donald Trump. We all know the Jeff Zucker, Donald Trump story, and we know it helped elect him in 2016. So there's a lot of reason to be skeptical about CNN's complete impartiality, but let's give them that. Let's give them that they were just doing what they needed to do to get through 90 minutes of a tough thing with 2 presidents on the stage. It's all quite feasible that they were just doing what they needed to do. I would question heavily why they needed to do things at the pacing that they did, but that's maybe just the way it was. The next things I want to look at are the lighting, and the audio is something that I introduced into the conversation a few days ago. And it's particularly interesting because what I found in my audio testing is not so much that the audio was not raised to the right volume for everyone to hear exactly what Joe Biden had done, but that there seemed to be some funny business going on in the modulation of Joe Biden's voice. In other words, it felt to me we were listening to just a fraction of the frequencies available to us in terms of Joe Biden's frequencies in his voice. Every single person has a range of frequencies that we use when we communicate. We have the deeper voices, we have the higher voices, and we modulate between each of those depending on our emotional level, our excitement level, or whatever. If you take out some of the deeper, bassier tones, you'll end up sounding a lot more horsey, and the tone of your voice just becomes a lot thinner. It becomes more, it's more difficult to understand. It becomes less authoritative. You're missing all your balls, for lack of a better word. And I noticed that right at the beginning when I was listening to Joe Biden's mix. There was something really strange. They're in this super quiet studio, right? There's a sound stage, basically. There shouldn't be anything noisy going on there. But it's picking up a lot of ambient buzz when he's talking for some reason. Where's this noise coming from? Why is it there? And then on top of that, he's only sounding very horsey. Before the debate and right after the debate, he does two events and he sounds normal, sounds great. And then right in the middle of the debate, he's got this stepped back, horsey, unusual voice. It's very high pitched. It's not typically him. Yes, he has a cold, but that's just a very strange look, I thought. We're going to get to all those tapes. I've got 3 different clips to play to you, and we'll explore them together. But first, I want to take us back to that conversation with George Stephanopoulos and Joe Biden. I thought it was illuminating, and we'll play as much of this as we can tonight as we continue through this. I really want to give you a chance to listen to Joe Biden, in his own words, explain what happened at that debate last Thursday in his conversation with George Stephanopoulos, which aired on ABC News yesterday morning.
Let's start with the debate. You and your team have said you had a bad night, but your friend Nancy Pelosi actually framed the question that I think is on the minds of millions of Americans. Was this a bad episode or the sign of a more serious condition?
It's a bad episode. No indication of any serious condition. I was exhausted. I didn't listen to my instincts in terms of preparing. I had a bad night.
You know, you say you were exhausted, and I know you've said that before as well, but you came, and you did have a tough month, but you came home from Europe about 11 or 12 days before the debate, spent 6 days in Camp David. Why wasn't that enough rest time, enough recovery time?
Because I was sick. I was feeling terrible. Matter of fact, the doc's with me. I asked him if they did a COVID test. We were trying to figure out what was wrong. He did a test to see whether or not I had some infection, a virus. I didn't. He just had a really bad cold.
And did you ever watch the debate afterwards?
I don't think I did, no.
Well, what I want to get at is what were you experiencing as you were going through the debate? Did you know how badly it was going?
Yeah, look. The whole way I prepared, nobody's fault mine. Nobody's fault but mine. I prepared what I usually would do, sitting down, as I did come back with foreign leaders or the National Security Council, for explicit detail. And I realized about partway through that, I get quoted the New York Times had me down at 10 points before the debate, 9 now or whatever the hell it is. The fact of the matter is that when I looked at is that he also lied 28 times. I couldn't. I mean, the way the debate ran, not my fault, nobody else's fault. Who knows?
But it seemed like you were having trouble from the first question in, even before he spoke.
Well, I just had a bad night.
I happen to believe Joe Biden when he says he had a bad night, and I think we all understand he had a bad night. He did have a mysterious cold. And we should talk about that mysterious cold because no one really knows where it came from. In returning from his trip to Europe, which was a very difficult trip, we all know, we all saw him going back and forth across the Atlantic twice just to conduct the national business, and performed pretty well under all those circumstances. But then he's exhausted, obviously. He comes back. He's got 6 days of training at Camp David where they're practicing for this debate. That is also pretty grueling stuff. That is not the kind of stuff that's just going to make you chill out and enjoy your getting better out of your illness. But he's got this mysterious thing now. He's got not something that isn't COVID, something that isn't a virus. He's got some bad cold. And that bad cold happens to reach a crescendo on the debate stage last Thursday. Now, you could say, maybe he really has a bad cold. Maybe that's just the way things were. Or you could ask some questions, as I think we should be asking, was it really a cold that made him behave that way on the stage, that gave him such a disoriented kind of look, that made him feel so out of sorts, that made him unable to complete full sentences, that made him look so old? There was no other way to describe it. Or maybe had someone given him something, maybe inadvertently, maybe on purpose, who knows? Had someone planned to give him something in order to make him less alert than he would normally be? We've seen him come out on stage at events like the State of the Union, where he is definitely on form. And whatever it is they might give him backstage, if they do, in fact, give him a shot of whatever, I don't know what Trump has been talking about. But let's say they give him a vitamin B shot backstage to give him that voom. Okay, great, do it as many times as you need to. But what didn't happen on debate night that should have happened on debate night to give him that voom, to really lift him up? Because we know that's possible. We've seen it apparently. So if that's the case, if that's what it takes, he wouldn't be the first president to have shots of things. Everyone remembers Kennedy's, was it Dr. Feelgood, I think? It happens. Presidents in the past have needed their energy boost, and whether it guarana or Gatorade or whatever it is that you might want to take, go to it. It's just your job. If you need to do those things, some of us need energy boost. The question really is, why wasn't he out there on stage looking and acting as we normally see him when he's got that State of the Union kind of energy? And he says it's a cold. Sure, it's a cold, but how did you get the cold? Why wasn't any of these other things working that you would normally do? Why could someone have maybe switched that out for you? Has someone maybe not given you what they said they were going to give you? Or did someone plant something somewhere? Did someone give you, who knows what the situation is? But that cold is an issue that we should be discussing. It's not a reason necessarily to dump the top of your ticket, Democratic Party. It's an issue to figure out why he wasn't on his top form. Maybe there was something that wasn't making him as good and polished as he was. Maybe something nefarious was going on. Someone maybe had slipped him something, or maybe there's something else. But is it really a reason to be knocking out the top of your ticket? I don't think so. This whole narrative, this whole bullshit about Joe Biden being too sick to continue has been going on in the media and in disinformation circles for as long as you and I have been talking about Joe Biden as the president. We've been talking about him being too old. And that is because Russian disinformation and whoever else in the enemies of democracy have put that narrative in place. It's not just that it keeps coming up. It keeps coming up with video that's fake video, by the way, of him not looking incoherent or looking like he's disoriented or walking away. We keep going there and looking at this video, and we know that's disinformation, but somehow we don't seem to discount the fact that is also just bullshit, that whole storyline, that he is not too old and too frail to lead. And sure, he might get some memory lapses sometimes, but who doesn't? He looks pretty good in that interview that we just saw with Stephanopoulos. 20 minutes, he sat there, he answered every question, knew what he was talking about, and knew in detail that we could get a real sense from him what was going on too. We need to think about whether we're asking the right questions when we are talking about replacing the man who basically helped deliver us from Donald Trump in 2016. He was able to take us from that horrible nightmare that happened in 2016 to a 2020 situation where Joe Biden came into power and really turned the ship around for America. If Donald Trump had won his second term then, where would we be now? But Joe Biden was there to save America and did save America. Now he's offering to give us another 4 years of his very limited life to continue doing that. And the Democratic Party's out there saying, oh, maybe you're too old. There are no other people. This is the guy who did the job already. Let him finish the job that he started. He's fine. More importantly, stop reading the Russian disinformation. You report on the Russian disinformation. I see it all the time. I see MSNBC, the same people who are kvetching right now about whether he should be the standard bearer, that he should be the Democratic nominee, are the same people who reported just a few weeks ago how prevalent Russian disinformation is and how the narratives are being everywhere and they're all discrediting Joe Biden for being too old. And yet you can't seem to put two and two together to realize that you're actually being a functionary of a Russian disinformation effort. He's not too old. That was a very deeply mysterious event that took place on Thursday. It was not a typical debate. Anyone who watched it realized it was not a typical debate. It's not even a decent performance of what Joe Biden would normally do in a debate. He was clearly not himself. Now, whether that was just the medication that maybe he shouldn't have taken or could have taken, or maybe someone slipped him something, maybe it was the cold he was going through. Or maybe it was some of these other things, like the format of the show, which was so quick and so in your face that it didn't really give someone a chance to absorb anything. Maybe it was the fact that even though Donald Trump's microphone was turned off, he kept yelling all the time at Joe Biden when he was answering his questions. On top of that, Donald Trump was parading around in what some people have termed the Gish Gallop. The Gish Gallop is apparently a way of debating in a way that really disorients your debater. And it does so by providing a very fast-paced, vigorous, constantly changing bunch of accusations, lies, whatever it is you want to throw at it. It doesn't matter. It's just as long as you're throwing at your opponent, you're disorienting them. So now we've got two things that are disorienting them, maybe three. You've got the format, you've got the Gish Gallop, you've got the fact that he was sick, or maybe somehow something had been slipped into his drink or something else. And he's now really out of sorts. And on top of that, what they did, and you must have seen this, is they layered on this artificially bright lighting on him. If you look around Biden's sphere there, you can see it. Joe Biden looks like he's a giant flashlight or the light in front of a car on high beam. You can barely see his face for the reflection of whatever it is that they're throwing at him from a light perspective. And Donald Trump does not look. What is going on in this lighting and why are they doing it? It's unusual. It's firstly remarkable that these two people did not share the same angle on camera. In other words, Donald Trump spent the entire debate looking forward at the camera, talking to the American people. And Joe Biden was looking over to the side. He didn't really seem to know where his camera was. And the reason behind that is his camera was all the way across the studio, on the far end of the studio. Why, in a debate where everything's meant to be equal, why would you not put the camera in the same distance from each of the main candidates when they're talking to the main people involved, the American people? You'd want to have the cameras equidistant, equal, same approach to both. But for some reason, CNN in its, they've done presidential debates. You'd think they'd know that. But instead, they chose to put the camera so far back that I don't know if Joe Biden could even see it. It was way, way, way back, covering his single shot there. It was very different than other people. And how we know that, you're saying, how do you know that? I wasn't in the studio. But I will say that when you look at these side by sides here, you notice how Donald Trump doesn't look as forward, doesn't look as stepped forward in front of the CNN as Joe Biden does. You can also see the CNN logos really clearly in the Donald Trump shot, right? You don't see it as clearly in the Joe Biden shot. He looks, firstly, much more stepped forward. He looks further away than that background, and that background looks very blurry. What is going on here? This is the joy of depth of field. If any one of you have ever done any shooting or filming, you would have done depth of field work. And it's complicated. I don't pretend I know all the f-stops and all that stuff. I don't know what that all, I could probably tell you the basics. But the basics are this. To get that shot that they needed of Joe Biden with the blurry background, their camera would have had to be further away than with the shot they used for where Donald Trump was getting his shot. And so the difference is interesting because depth of field is really the amount of space within your shot, the depth of the shot that stays in focus. So in the Donald Trump shot, there's a much larger depth of field. Everything stays in focus, including him, all the way back to that CNN picture and the CNN logos behind him. In Joe Biden's case, it's blurry back there. And you can see even the top of his jacket looks a little blurry, which means the depth of field is actually very narrow where he is, basically just around his face, which they've then lit extremely brightly. So now you've got someone whose every little detail is so in focus because the depth of field is so completely narrow. That's what everyone can see, fitting back into that scene quite well and looks confident and presidential, while we're seeing every little detail of Joe Biden's face pop out because they're using a completely different shot. And there's something very pernicious about that. And for those people who were involved in that production, you know this, you were going to create a look where Joe Biden would look very frail and his aging details would be very apparent. Plus you were throwing on so much light that you would have, in fact, made him look really old, white, and shiny. And on top of that, in order to accommodate all the additional light and in all the other stuff that you would have thrown on there, because you want the depth of field to be so narrow, you would have screwed around with the shutter speed. I think what you have to do to achieve this kind of look, if you're going to screw around with the shutter speed on something like this, it would actually change the speed at which you are seeing the object. So in other words, if you were shooting something with a high shutter speed and your subject is walking down the street, the feet would appear to move much quicker. They'd give you that sort of blurry effect because the shutter speed is fast. It's catching all the motion. The opposite is also true. Things would look much slower and also stilted, like a strange kind of stutter almost in the picture would exist if you took this shutter speed and turned it down. I could be wrong, but I think this is the way it works. The shutter speed would make it look like Joe Biden was moving at a really strange kind of movement where he was slowly moving his head, but not in the normal pace that an average person would be. But his mouth might be moving very quickly, for example, which I thought was evident. His mouth looked like it was just moving on its own and his head wasn't really in the same zone. And so my point is really this. My point is that shutter speed adjustments can affect the way the viewer is perceiving the object or the subject that you are shooting. And if you're doing this elaborate shot that you've now constructed here with the extra depth of field for Donald Trump and the much narrower depth of field for Joe Biden, where you're making him look old, you're throwing on this additional light. And on top of that, you're now changing the way he's perceived to the viewer by changing the shutter speed. That's not fair. There's nothing about that's fair. And CNN has to know this, and they should answer to this question of why were these shots so different? Maybe there's a very good reason that these shots were so different. Maybe they weren't messing with the shutter speed. Maybe they weren't messing with the depth of field. Maybe they weren't throwing on extra lights onto Joe Biden. But if they were, considering the consequential nature of this debate, they need to tell us why they did that, because it might impact the future of the country. Before anything else, before running around figuring out who might replace Joe Biden at the top of the ticket because he's old and frail, maybe we should answer these questions. Maybe we should answer the questions about whether Joe Biden was treated fairly in that election debate and whether Donald Trump had some sort of advantage and why he had that advantage. Potentially he had that advantage. How disorienting would that have been for Joe Biden? He's got this extra light, hot light, pointed directly at him that would be almost blinding to accommodate the reduced shutter speed and the depth of field. And you'd have to ask, why would they do that? Why on earth would you hyperlight Joe Biden with all these shadows and everything? And look at how Donald Trump, who's not a good-looking man, looking pretty good in his shot, but Joe Biden not. Just has to be just these important questions. These are things we can't gloss over, because if we do, we run the risk of missing the story here, which could be that someone maybe was messing around with the production of this debate, and the Biden campaign was caught afoot. On the one hand, only 3 or 4 people were in the debate studio with him, just Joe Biden and some other people. You wouldn't have the studio audience to even say that the experience inside the live debate was different from what you saw on TV, because you would never get to know that because you're not producing it for the live event. And so that's just another factor. And it's just something I want you to really consume and think about, whether we really understand, did we get the full story? Do we understand why he was sick? Do we understand why the lighting was different? Do we understand why the shooting arrangement was so different? Maybe we need to go there and answer those questions first before we ask any other questions about who might replace the guy who got us out of the crisis in the first place at the top of the ticket. Now to my audio tests. I ran these tests because I wanted to see what happened. I don't think it's screwed up, but I just want to put that proviso out there. So I took some of the audio that I thought was very muffled and cleaned up and like very hissy, and the president did not sound as good as he normally sounds in various events. And so I took the moment of putting them through something that I put most of my voice tracks through when you're hearing not this live show, when you're hearing the show. At the start of the show, you would have heard my voice had been denoised. It had gone through a digital AI filter, which had cleared out all the background noises and just left you with a pure voice. It's really a great thing that's available on. I use it from Descript, DESCRIPT. I highly recommend using Descript. This is a great piece of AI that saves me a lot of time and energy, allows me to do my show in an open space. I don't have to go into a sound booth, but it clears out all the background audio. What it also does for people like Joe Biden in a situation where he's at is it would have isolated the voice as it was being presented. I'm going to play you these clips. There's 3 clips. The first part is the unenhanced audio. you can hear are a little bit strange already anyhow. And the second part is the enhanced video where I've taken out all the noise, denoised, and you can hear the variation in what, I haven't touched it, but Joe Biden's audio changes through the things that he talks about. His audio just shifts. I hope it comes through to you at home, because what I've got here is another compressor and another limiter. It may sound all the same to you, but I'm going to try anyhow, because I think it's worth us running through this exercise. Here's clip one of this is Joe Biden and Donald Trump. They just started the debate. And the first thing you're going to hear is the audio that they sent out over the CNN stream. And the second thing you'll hear is the enhanced noised out, or the noise reduction piece.
Well, look, the greatest economy in the world, he's the only one who thinks that, I think. I don't know anybody else who thinks he's the greatest economy in the world. And, you know, the fact of the matter is that we find ourselves in a situation where his economy, he rewarded the wealthy. He had the largest tax cut in American history, $2 trillion. He raised a deficit larger than any president has in any one term. He's the only president other than Herbert Hoover who's lost more jobs than he had when he began, since Herbert Hoover. Well, look, the greatest economy in the world, he's the only one who thinks that, I think. I don't know anybody else who thinks he had the greatest economy in the world. You know, the fact of the matter is that we find ourselves in a situation where his economy, he rewarded the wealthy. He had the largest tax cut in American history, $2 trillion. He raised a deficit larger than any president has in any one term. He's the only president other than Herbert Hoover who's lost more jobs than he had when he began, since Herbert Hoover.
I don't know if you could catch that right at the start, how his voice modulation changed digitally when Joe Biden was speaking. And that's very weird. That's very weird. It shouldn't be happening. This technology that I'm using is an app that basically is designed to take away the noise and to find the most prominent way to display the voice that is currently on that tape. So it gives you some boost on the middle ranges, and it gives you some boost maybe on the lower ranges, but it takes away the noise around you. It makes you sound much more clear and easy to understand. But when it's trying to do that with Joe Biden's voice over there, it was missing, I felt, the mid-range frequencies of his voice. The middle part of his voice wasn't there. All we heard was the hoarseness, the loud part of the high-pitched part of his voice. That's what I thought we got a lot more of. Plus, it's odd that this stuff is changing mid-fly. He's busy speaking at a presidential debate, and his voice is changing halfway through, but not because his voice is changing. It's actually just changing digitally.
Number two, that $2 trillion tax cut benefited the very wealthy. What I'm going to do is fix the tax system. For example, we have 1,000 billionaires in America. And what's happening? They're in a situation where they, in fact, pay 8.2% in taxes. If they just paid 24%, 25%, either one of those numbers, they'd raise $500 billion, I should say, in a 10-year period. We'd be able to wipe out his debt. We'd be able to help make sure that all those things we need to do, child care, elder care, making sure that we continue to strengthen our healthcare system. Number two, that $2 trillion tax cut benefited the very wealthy. What I'm going to do is fix the tax system. For example, we have 1,000 billionaires in America. Billionaires in America. And what's happening? They're in a situation where they, in fact, pay 8.2% in taxes. If they just paid 24%, 25%, either one of those numbers, they'd raise $500 billion, I should say, in a 10-year period. We'd be able to wipe out his debt. We'd be able to help make sure that all those things we need to do, child care, elder care, making sure that we continue to strengthen our healthcare system.
And then there's this really unusual sort of high-pitched little sections where he doesn't sound like a human being. It sounds like he's modulated differently. What is going on there? Why is he the only voice on the CNN debate stage that had this kind of modulation? It didn't look to me like Donald Trump had modulation. It didn't look to me like Dana Bash, or Jake Tapper had any modulations. Why is Joe Biden's voice so different than everybody else? This is CNN. This is not a newbie to broadcasting. These guys know how to do television. They know how to do TV events. Was something going on there? Was something really strange going on that really needs to be explained? I think so. I think it deserves at least a investigation by CNN or whomever. An independent investigator might be interesting for people to go around and just see, just for interest's sake, just to know for certainty that the US presidential debate was not messed around with, Here's the third tape. You're going to get it back and forth here. You'll see both the original, then it'll go back to the enhanced, and then it'll go back to original, then to enhanced. Take a look.
We got to take a look at what I was left when I became president, what Mr. Trump left me. We had an economy that was in free fall. The pandemic was so badly handled. Many people were dying. All he said was, it's not that serious. Just inject a little bleach into your arm. You'll be all right. The economy collapsed. There were no jobs. Unemployment rate rose to 15%. It was terrible. And so what we had to do is try to put things back together again. And that's exactly what we began to do. We created 15,000 new jobs. We brought out the position where we have 800,000 new manufacturing jobs. But there's more to be done. We got to take a look at what I was left when I became president, for what Mr. Trump left me. We had an economy that was in free fall. The pandemic was so badly handled. Many people were dying. All he said was, it's not that serious. Just inject a little bleach into your arm. You'll be all right. The economy collapsed. There were no jobs. Unemployment rate rose to 15%. It was terrible. And so what we had to do is try to put things back together again. That's exactly what we began to do. We created 15,000 new jobs. We brought out the position where we have 800,000 new manufacturing jobs. But there's more to be done. There's more to be done. Working class people are still in trouble. I come from Scranton, Pennsylvania. I come of household where the kitchen table, if the things weren't able to be met during the month, it was a problem. Price of eggs, the price of gas, the price of housing, the price of a whole range of things. That's why I'm working so hard to make sure I deal with those problems. And we're going to make sure that we reduce the price of housing. We're going to make sure we build 2 million new units. We're going to make sure we cap rents so corporate greed can't take over. The combination, what I was left with in corporate greed, is the reason why we're in this problem right now. There's more to be done. Working class people are still in trouble. I come from Scranton, Pennsylvania. I come of household where the kitchen table, if the things weren't able to be met during the month, it was a problem. Price of eggs, the price of gas, the price of housing, the price of a whole range of. That's why I'm working so hard to make sure I deal with those problems. That we're going to make sure that we reduce the price of housing. We're going to make sure we build 2 million new units. We're going to make sure we cap rents so corporate greed can't take over. The combination that I was left with in corporate greed is the reason why we're in this problem.
It sounds like Joe Biden's voice is being manipulated. It really does. It doesn't sound like that for any of the other participants in the debate. And it certainly feels to me like at least needs an investigation. We're talking about replacing the president of the United States based on the performance he did in that election. If there's something that's that important that we're willing to actually ditch the guy at the top of the ticket because of something that we're not really sure how good he is in these situations, we have to remove all these factors that may have hurt him during that night. And clearly there's a lot of things that may have hurt his performance that night. Thank you, Patriotic Plays. I appreciate your comment there. Apothecary Delm, one, who says steroids such as prednisone and its variants are commonly used to reduce lung inflammation and known to temporarily cause confusion in the elderly and very young children. This common adverse drug reaction can mimic the signs and symptoms of dementia. Isn't that interesting? Steroids such as prednisone. That's something that we should definitely take a look at. There must be a lot of things that can look like dementia, actually, when you think about it. It suddenly rendered me dumb. But I never thought about the steroids like a prednisone. And thank you very much, Apothecary DLM. Thank you for that. Note, Birder, one, says, if anything, they boosted his mic because he can barely speak. Yes, he boosted his mic. That's not that he can barely speak. His voice is being stripped of the frequencies that would normally give you speaking ability. In other words, they've taken out the core middle frequencies that make up most people's voices, and they've left him with just the horsiness. Now, maybe that's the cold that he had, but maybe it's something else. I always like to do these things partially live because I love to have the reaction from everybody, and I like to be able to see the news land in a space that hasn't been pre-told by other factors like Elon Musk adjusting who can see my feed or not. But because Elon Musk does on a regular basis limit how many people access my feed, it doesn't allow it to be broadly distributed. If you like tonight's show, if you think it added any value to you or to the story, I urge you to please retweet it, but it's best if you put a quote at the top. A quote at the top will allow me to bridge all the filters that Elon Musk likes to put on my content so it can't reach a wide audience. And you know, it's important for me to reach a wide audience because the news is important, the stuff that we're sharing is important, but also because Narrative relies exclusively on people's support, our viewers' support for survival. We don't get that many advertisers because the content we have is It can be difficult for some advertisers because it's the truth. The truth can be difficult. But secondly, we just rely on our viewers who really care about the truth, who care about democracy, who care about freedom, and who care about our work to stop corruption and to stop the advent of even more criminal activity entering our government. We rely on you guys to support Narrative. And you can do that through Patreon at patreon.com/narrative. Subscribe to our Substack at narrative.substack.com, narrative.substack.com. There's a YouTube membership is available. If you're watching on YouTube, just hit that join button under the screen. And finally, I should mention that we also have our brand new newsletter. You can go to narrative.org, NARATIV.org, NARATIV.org, and you can sign up there for a newsletter. And there is a paid portion for that. And all these things is a paid portion, and that paid portion is how we make our money. If you appreciate tonight's report and you like it, please join us in supporting us on Patreon or Substack or anywhere else that we offer our free memberships. Thank you for being here tonight. I appreciate you staying up late. I stayed up late to finish this because I think it's that important for everybody to just understand what's going on. There's something really strange in the news cycle happening right now. It's very unusual to have this replace Biden conversation in such full tilt happening so close to the event without anyone investigating the event itself. And the president, I think, more than outdid himself in that interview with George Stephanopoulos. I think he was coherent, smart, and capable of handling things. Plus, he gave us the confidence, at least me the confidence, that he can do the job and not being in any way feel like a tired old person. If you've watched campaign rallies of late, boy, oh boy, that guy has a ton of energy. And there's no doubt in my mind that anyone who could stand up at dozens of those events on a regular basis, he can do this job. It just exemplifies how much energy, how much passion he has for this job. And I'm not even trying to endorse the guy. I'm trying to stay completely neutral. This guy's got the ability to be the president, I think, if you look at the way he's doing this. There are 81-year-olds that couldn't do this, and there are 81-year-olds that can do this. And you look at this tape, you tell me if Joe Biden can't do this job. Have a good night, everybody. Thanks for being here on Narrative, and thanks for watching this special report.
Now you probably heard we had a little debate last week. Can't say it was my best performance. But ever since then, there's been a lot of speculation. What's Joe going to do? Is he going to stay in the race? Is he going to drop out? What's he going to do? Well, here's my answer. I am running and going to win again. Because we're going to go. Folks, I'm the sitting president of the United States of America in no small part because of you. Not a joke. In 2020, you came through for me. I'm the nominee of the Democratic Party. I'm the nominee of this party because millions of Democrats like you just voted for me in primaries all across America. You voted for me to be your nominee. No one else. You, the voters did that. And despite that some folks don't seem to care who you voted for, well, guess what? They're trying to push me out of the race. Well, let me say this as clearly as I can. I'm staying in the race. I'll beat Donald Trump. I will beat him again in 2020. Well, by the way, we're going to do it again in 2024. I learned long ago, when you get knocked down, you get back up. I'm not letting one 90-minute debate wipe out 3.5 years of work. As the governor said, I've led this nation from the depths of pandemic to the strongest economy in the world, and that's literally true. And I and you are not finished yet. Now, you probably also noticed a lot of discussion about my age. I know I look 40. I keep seeing all those stories about I'm being too old. Let me say something. I was too old. I wasn't too old. I wasn't too old to create over 15 million new jobs. To make sure 21 million Americans are insured under the Affordable Care Act. To beat Big Pharma, the first time ever to do that, and lower the cost of insulin to $35 procedure. Was I too old to relieve student debt for nearly 5 million Americans and grow the economy? Too old to put the first black woman on the Supreme Court of the United States of America? To sign the Respect for Marriage Act? Was I too old to sign the most significant gun safety law in 30 years? To pass the biggest climate bill in the history of the world, not here, the history of the world. But then, my critics say, sure, but he did all that. But that was in the past. What about now? Well, how about the 200,000 jobs we announced yesterday? So let me ask you, what do you think? You think I'm too old to restore Roe v. Wade, the law of the land? You think I'm too old to ban assault weapons again? To protect Social Security and Medicare? To get child care, elder care for working families who need the nation? To make billionaires finally start to pay something beyond 8.2% of the tax rate? Let me ask you, you think I'm too old to beat Donald Trump? I can hardly wait. Anyway.
One day, you'll tell the story of autocrats, crooks, and kings who came for our freedom. A story of citizens who stood up to tyranny and won. The people prevailed and renewed an old vow to a more perfect union. And that was just the beginning. The story continues. Narrative, where truth lives.